When people talk about the Dreamcast, it's not the screen and the controller, the built in online functionality, or range of accessories that are cited. It's the console's innovation in its totality. The Dreamcast brought forth a bold new vision of not just how we game, but in a rather traditional sense, the worlds we can inhabit through a TV screen. Yet, the console's library has become something of a meme. Most prominently, you'll hear Seaman, Crazy Taxi, and Shenmue noted as examples of experimental titles, followed by best selling hits like Sonic Adventure. Well, I wouldn't disagree that the console has a number of highly experimental and avant garde titles, in spite of its well defined library of popular PC ports, sports games, and arcade conversions. I would take issue with how shallow this analysis of the console's library typically is. Rarely are third party games like Seventh Cross Evolution, I Spy Operation Espionage, or Illbleed included in these discussions. Somewhat poetically, Illbleed was the final official horror title released for the Dreamcast in the West. Illbleed is a death knell, released too late to garner enough attention to succeed financially, but also a game that could not have existed in any other space, being an intrinsic commentary on Sega leaving the home console market. It's the band playing on deck as the ship sank. It's arguably the Dreamcast's best horror game, and undoubtedly perhaps one of, if not the, most Dreamcast game by any definition. This limited series will explore and celebrate Crazy Games' final title, searching every nook and cranny of the park and musing about why Illbleed's unique vintage of horror is so potent and so important. Climax Graphics, headed by Shinya Nishigaki, formed in 1996. Nishigaki had previously worked with Sega via Climax Entertainment on Landstalker and Dark Savior. Nishigaki formed Climax Graphics with several alumni from Climax Entertainment to begin work on their premier title, Blue Stinger. Though it would ultimately be produced by Activision for the North American market, Blue Stinger was a Sega-produced title in Japan, making Climax Graphics into a sort of second-party studio. Blue Stinger borrowed as much from the established survival horror genre as it innovated. It missed the Dreamcast launch window in Japan, but was available at launch in North America and Europe. The Japanese version of the game adhered to a cinematic fixed camera, a la pre-rendered games like Resident Evil, albeit one that could pan and zoom thanks to the environments being rendered in real time. This was changed for the Western release upon Activision's insistence. Which viewpoint works better is oft debated, and an interesting note to keep in mind before we get to Illbleed. That said, it's debatable whether Blue Stinger is a horror game at all. It ticks most of the boxes, with puzzles, navigating large, interconnected environments, and managing health and ammunition as you fight throngs of ravenous mutant creatures. However, for most of the game, Blue Stinger is a less urgent experience, allowing players to experiment with combat in ways most survival horror games of the era didn't. The story revolves around Emergency Sea Evacuation and Rescue, ESER, member Elliot Ballad, taking his vacation on cyberpunk resort spot Dinosaur Island in the year 2018. Before he arrives, a meteor hits the island, creating a sort of shield around the area and surrounding waters. Elliot finds himself on the wrong side of this bubble and is quickly attacked by a pack of giant insects. He is rescued and brought to shore by a glowing wisp of light which, upon first meeting Elliot, takes the form of an angel in a bottle that happened to be close to him. On the shores of the island, Elliot moves inland through a series of gates, only to discover much of the population has been transformed into aggressive mutant dinosaur hybrids. He joins forces with two other survivors, Dogs Bauer and Janine King. Together, they work to find a way off the island, find other survivors, and solve the mystery of the dinosaur mutants and angelic force watching over them. Blue Stinger's setting is artistically unique, with the island containing futuristic, often monolithic structures, somewhat evocative of Sid Mead's work. However, the core setting of a ruined city populated by monsters, like Resident Evil, is intact. Though it was often compared, usually unfavorably, to Capcom's flagship survival horror series, Blue Stinger differentiates itself in many ways. For one, most enemies respawn between areas and drop money when killed. Players can pick this money up and spend it at vending machines to buy more ammo, new guns, or healing items, thus taking away some of the stress in inventory management. Blue Stinger still requires the careful circumventing of areas, avoiding fights in certain scenarios. Saving is also limited to certain points, and the game rewards quicker playthroughs with New Game Plus bonuses, encouraging players not to simply sit and grind for hours. This system drives home the cyberpunk setting, too, encouraging consumerism even in the direst of circumstances. The populace may be dead, but the shopping mall's lights are still on and the automated vendors are open for business. It's ridiculous, but aptly suiting. There are also survivors that can be saved, granting bonus cutscenes or items for successful rescues. When accessing computers on the island, the screen overlays a transparent layer, giving vantage of the system running Elliot and Dog's commands. It's an excellent piece of world building, giving the player vantage of the island's complex computer network firsthand, without forcing them to work with it manually. Many parts of the island are simply beautiful to stand and behold. The command center rest zone is the most notable of these, with a fantastic view of the sea from the window, while sleep pods beckon you to take a break, if only it weren't for the impending dinosaur apocalypse. There are numerous points in the game like this, like the failed clone of Jascony in the stasis pool, the seemingly never-ending service corridors leading to the point of the meteor's impact, or even the fishing pier, which on any other day would have been a delightful place to spend an afternoon angling. Nephilim follows you for a good portion of the game, flying in and out of the environments with a trail of blue sparks trailing behind, and her blue glow illuminating spaces in real time as she moves. Her inclusion is cool from a narrative standpoint as you are unsure of her intentions, but also from a technical standpoint. Whether it's the majestic vistas seen from atop the fuel tank or the neon-lit streets of the shop zone, Blue Stinger's world begs to be appreciated, and whatever your opinion of the actual game design, it's hard to argue this wasn't a massive step up for real-time 3D environmental design from the previous generation, even when compared to AAA survival horror titles like Code Veronica. In fact, Blue Stinger feels like a AAA production in many ways. Even if the game's visuals are not the highest of fidelity compared to its contemporaries in the Dreamcast launch library in terms of polygon count, the game's orchestrated score presents the game as a blockbuster film. While the Hello Market jingle is the game's most frequently cited song, the rest of the orchestration is just as deserved of praise. Together with the aforementioned graphical effects like lighting, view distance, and density of texture detail, the score makes Blue Stinger feel like a much higher budget production than it actually is. Critics were tepid with the game upon release. Official Dreamcast magazine awarded it a 6 out of 10, with reviewer Francesca Reyes hoping it could have been for the Dreamcast or Resident Evil had been for the PlayStation, but claimed it wasn't so. Reyes praised the side quest and freedom to swap characters, but said the puzzles and story weren't as engaging. She did appreciate the new camera system, however. The game reportedly sold quite well, with an estimated 500,000 copies sold over the console's lifetime. Blue Stinger also has a special place in many Dreamcast gamers' hearts. It was released amidst a packed lineup of 18 launch games in the West, so it wasn't like gamers were buying it out of lack of choice. It set the bar high for survival horror on the console, though most people still seemed more preoccupied with what Capcom would showcase. The seeds were planted, however, and Climax Graphics, rebranding to Crazy Games, got to work on their next game, another horror title that would innovate in wholly ambitious ways, and even take a little from Blue Stinger, too. In issue 8 of Official Dreamcast magazine, York Tittle previewed Crazy Games' upcoming production, Illbleed. Tittle stressed that Nishigaki was not aiming to compete or copy the established survival horror genre. Code Veronica could have it. Instead, Illbleed was going to be a horror house game. It was based upon giving the player different horror experiences in a level-based format, with RPG and arcade systems to boot. It was a lot to take in, and a bit hard to imagine such a genre-defined product. While Blue Stinger was an ambitious and innovative game in many ways, it fell short of reaching its intended mass appeal. Years later, when asked about the fan-made Illbleed production, Illbleed 2: Reynolds' Revenge, Nishigaki stated, "If one person likes Illbleed, then to me, it's a success." In Illbleed, players assume the avatar of high school student, president of the horror club, speech competition entrant, and actress Eriko Christie. Along with her group of friends, Eriko receives a free ticket to Michael Reynolds' virtual horror land, Illbleed. Here, guests can win $100 million if they survive all of the park's attractions. Nishigaki explained that the game had over 1,500 traps for players to navigate, and that each level would provide its own unique gauntlet of challenges. Though elements from survival horror would still be present, like self-care and managing crucial supplies, Illbleed aimed to add depth without adding complexity. Nishigaki explained that players would be awarded with cash prizes for completing park attractions, and that this payout would be graded on criteria like time taken, traps cleared, and health statistics. This would encourage a faster and more effective playstyle, akin to a good ranking in a Resident Evil game, albeit here your progress depended on each level. Funds acquired act as a sort of score at the end of the game, but they also could be spent in the park on upgrading your characters and buying more supplies. Furthermore, Nishigaki wanted to ensure Illbleed remained approachable, and by way of making several smaller attractions instead of one long campaign, players could feel confident in resuming a save file left alone for a period of time without being intimidated by complex puzzles left half-finished or a massive play area unexplored. While exploration and puzzle solving were intrinsic to the game's design, they were presented in a deceptively linear fashion, making the game approachable as picking up an arcade game. Tittle revealed that Nishigaki had flown out to New York, where he was living at the time, in order to put the interview together. He stated they went to steakhouses at Nishigaki's request, a curious appreciation we would see manifest in Illbleed as well. Upon ODCM publishing the preview, Nishigaki was incredibly grateful, as it led to an upstart publisher picking the game up for a Western release. Prior to this, Sega had been attached to publish the title, but it was not known whether it would be released outside of Japan. Not long after, Tittle flew out to California at Nishigaki's request to voice a character in the game, based upon Tittle himself. Directed by veteran voice actor Lanny Minella, who not only voiced all of the women in the English edition of Illbleed, but also Janine King in Blue Stinger, Roost the Bat in Sonic Adventure 2, and Nettie in Shadow Man, just to list her Dreamcast resume, Tittle joined the other actors for a hasty recording session. York Baker, a reporter, was initially playable throughout the whole campaign, as revealed by a prototype dump released several years back, but was later fit into only the final 2 levels. Tittle stated that Nishigaki must have assumed that because he was working as a journalist, that he would make a good detective too, thus explaining Baker's role in the game. It was a touching inclusion, and a wonderful story of game development, promotion, and friendship working in tandem. Illbleed released in spring 2001 in North America, 3 months after it was announced the Dreamcast would be discontinued. It fell into obscurity rather quickly, but has since risen in popularity amongst horror fans, and demands a high price tag on the second-hand market. Sadly, Nishigaki passed away in 2004 after suffering a heart attack. Though there were plans to port Illbleed and Blue Stinger to the original Xbox in Japan, these ports never came to fruition, and Crazy Games eventually closed shop. Now game publisher himself, in 2023, Tittle wrote and produced The Last Worker. In it, he hid an Easter egg about Illbleed, paying tribute to his late friend. Crazy Games bookended the Dreamcast horror library. Both of its games hold their own solid fan bases. Though Blue Stinger and Illbleed are similar conceptually in some ways, the 2 titles are just as different. While the story of Crazy Games is beautiful as it is tragic, it is Illbleed we are here to visit. Over 2 decades since Michael Reynolds' virtual Horrorland first opened its gates to visitors, let's step back inside and explore the visceral madness and comedy of Illbleed. Who Illbleed's customers are and why they would want to go to such a place is a question that will come up numerous times throughout the series. But for now, let's plead ignorance and simply label them as a bunch of kids looking to kill an afternoon, so to speak. Illbleed opens with Eriko Christie competing in the 18th annual high school speech competition. Eriko speaks about her childhood, focusing on her father's traveling horror caravan. She explains that she was often the guinea pig for his fright devices and contraptions. The scene cuts to a young Eriko on 2 occasions, showing her running from a stumbling monster and falling into a shallow pit where she curls up and begins to cry. Though traumatic, Eriko states that the experience has toughened her up and inspired her to study child psychology. Looking at the instruction booklet, we discovered that Eriko has more than a passing interest in horror. In fact, she's the president of her high school's horror movie research club, and even starred in the film Killer Man 7, Killer Man Goes to Japan. After the competition, Eriko meets her friends Kevin Kurtzman and Randy Fairbanks outside. Here, the group have a short discussion about Eriko's prospects of winning the competition before the final member of their group, Michelle Waters, arrives with 4 tickets to Michael Reynolds' virtual Horrorland, Illbleed, in hand, claiming she received them from a Pepco promotion. The group excitedly discussed the mysterious park, citing the $100 million cash prize, sharing what they would do with such a large sum of money. Eriko is less enthusiastic than her friends, dismissing the park as a scam. Kevin, Michelle, and Randy try to convince Eriko, stating the park is probably filled with nothing but cheesy props and gags. Eriko holds firm, however, and the group opts to leave without her. In a twist of fate, Eriko's ticket lands at her feet, where she reluctantly picks it up. This opening sequence sets the tone for a goofy horror adventure, far less serious than traditional survival horror fare. Kevin, Michelle, Randy, and Eriko all represent horror archetypes, with Kevin being the free-spirited and ignorant youth, Michelle the esoteric medium, and Randy the jock. In a stereotypical but wholly predictable teenager move, the group simply rush towards danger, seemingly having no sense of self-preservation. Eriko, then, is the final girl, or perhaps the first girl, who inadvertently senses something suspicious about the proposition of earning $100 million for completing a series of horror houses. Comedic as it is on one hand, this introduction simultaneously sets an unnerving and predatory tone for the game through its environmental design. Eriko's ticket drifting back towards her could be written off as horror happenstance, ultimately giving her a path to visit the park, where we know there are greater forces at work. When Eriko is speaking, the crowd of people in the small theater are merely black silhouette cutouts, with Foley-like clapping used to suggest life because they do not animate in the slightest. This artificial audience appears out of scale to Eriko's character model, suggesting a foreboding, judgmental, and predatory gaze. Outside, the walkway where Eriko meets her friends is similarly obscure. The sparsely designed building features only concrete and brick, with no windows visible anywhere on the structure, and the only entrance being the large green door Eriko stands next to. Furthermore, Eriko seems to have come from around the corner where the walkway abruptly meets the bordering forested area. This background texture of impossibly dense and dark woods is, like the crowd silhouettes, a 2D backdrop. Overhead, clouds hang low and daylight seems to be quickly slipping away. This could just mean that Eriko's speech took place near the end of the school day. However, going back to the surrounding architecture, there are no lights present, making it one incredibly inhospitable high school. While one might be tempted to pin these design choices on rushed development or lack of artistic ingenuity, once in the park proper, it quickly becomes clear that the game is not lacking in graphical fidelity or planning. Furthermore, watching this introduction scene for the first time at launch, gamers following its development would have had Blue Stinger as a reference, and that game is filled with graphically diverse imagery. Thus, this harsh introduction can only be read as purposeful. When her friends fail to return after a few days, Eriko goes to the park to investigate. Illbleed is in the literal middle of nowhere. Expanses of grass fields and foothills extend as far as the eye can see. Well, as far as you can see through the fog. There are no trees in sight. The landscape is groomed, eerily so, emphasizing the emptiness. The park complex is sizable, but is surrounded by a curiously short stone wall. Eriko approaches the ticket booth, manned by a woodman. She tries to communicate with the attendant, to which we receive subtitles, though Eriko is seemingly left oblivious. The gate opens and she is ushered inside, perhaps unaware that she has just committed to participating in the park. No opportunity to speak with other staff regarding her friends is given. Instead, the game simply begins. The park supposedly grants a $100 million prize to contestants. Couple this with the fact that public knowledge surrounding what Illbleed is appears to be quite small, and it's surprising to see no lineup, or any other guess, at all. Later in the game, we're given the figure that over 100 people die in Illbleed every day, but here, there are none to be seen. Eriko's visitor card reads 964. This could be a randomly assigned number, but looking at her friend's Illbleed IDs, we can see Kevin's entry number is 2558. How Illbleed would have to admit and process these guests will be discussed later, but for now, let's take a tour of the main park area. The admission booth is modeled after Hellcake, a character we'll meet later in the game. Upon entering the gates, Eriko is greeted by two caricatured cycloptic statues, a coffin and a cross. It's a fitting warning dressed up as cheap Halloween props, telegraphing the real threat of death. West of the statues is the ER room, where guests can spend their winnings on medical treatment. This treatment is given by Dummyman, a recurring character/enemy in the park. It is revealed throughout the attractions that most enemies in the park are in fact staff dressed up in Illbleed's highly durable costumes. Whether the Dummymen in the ER are doctors and nurses employed by Illbleed, or whether they are fully or partially automated suits is never divulged, but the treatments given are seemingly effective. And again, despite the large waiting room, there are no other patrons inside. Back outside, there are several benches situated around the main park area. Guests are not permitted to leave until completing the park. Thus, you would imagine some would want to take a break between attractions. As we will see, they can be quite taxing. Yet many of the benches outside are broken. This may be by design as to not have guests resting for too long. Inside of the ER would seemingly be a good place to rest too, but perhaps this is simply not permitted. There are security guards in the park, though as we will see, they mostly work in the back lot and behind the scenes. However, it wouldn't be unbelievable to have them enforce a sort of no loitering policy, pushing guests onto the next attraction and out of the main park area, as unnerving new or potential guests at the gates with their distress could be bad for business. Returning to the ER, another factor hinting at there being more to the park than meets the eye is the so called upgrade operation. These operations are not recovery treatments like other services offered in the ER. Rather, they can elevate one's stamina by making their heart, muscles, adrenal glands, or veins more durable. These operations are only offered if players have collected body tissues that are kept within special containers hidden throughout the stages. Upgrade operations and the materials used for them allude to Illbleed being far more than just an amusement park. Next along the perimeter is the common cemetery. This acts as the training grounds, teaching guests about another of Illbleed's proprietary pieces of technology, the horror monitor. The horror monitor is a helmet fitted with electronic equipment capable of reading a guest's vital signs, as well as seemingly projecting other medical and ethereal data linked to a guest through a set of zoomable AR lenses. In the cemetery, players can practice using the horror monitor to find items and learn about their sixth sense, an innate ability that can mark objects or enemies in the environment. One of the items that can be collected in the cemetery is a Hassie drink. Hassie is a reused, or rather pre-used, brand from Blue Stinger, a carbonated drink that restores health. As we'll see in the Killer Department Store stage, Blue Stinger is likely a product associated with Michael Reynolds, not an event which takes place in the Illbleed universe. Hassie then can be read as a sort of cross-marketing placement in Blue Stinger, like Coca-Cola and Blade Runner, for example. Speaking of merchandise, guests can spend their winnings on supplies from Mary's drugstore. If you thought markups were bad at regular amusement parks, you might want to be sitting down for this part. You start the game with only $3,000. Now, considering Eriko and friends got into the park with free passes, it's hard to say if that's the allotted amount for regular guests paying their way in. Still, after buying medical supplies for the upcoming attraction, of which you don't know what type of supplies you'll need, you'll find that $3,000 doesn't go very far. Illbleed is a bit like a casino in that the park always makes its winnings back by making you spend them in the park. Furthermore, you don't get to keep items between stages, suggesting any leftover supplies are confiscated by park staff between attractions. Initially, there was supposed to be an insurance agency of some kind in the main park area, but this feature was never implemented into the game. Instead, we have the Visitor Bank, which essentially keeps track of visitors' fates. Here, Eriko can learn about her friend's progress and even pay a fee to have them resuscitated. It is likely that the information displayed by the Visitor Bank stays within the park, meaning if you were looking for someone who had gone to Illbleed, you would have to enter the park as a contestant and visit the bank in order to find out whether they were still alive. Finally, the photo booth is an eerily decorated room of, repeating, portraits hung on the walls. There are several couches in the room and a lone dummy man camera operator who will take a souvenir photo for you. Again, the couches here are empty, curious as this seems like the perfect place to relax after fighting for your life. This is the game's saving mechanism. It's a bit of a shame this wasn't expanded into something cooler, letting players pose for photos between levels with friends, but it works. The shops and services are, as noted, all staffed by personnel in costume. There's no conversation permitted, only the exchange of services. The attendants stand silently, coldly, as you wander their space. Moving to the upper park, where the attraction entrances are, there are no staff whatsoever. This area is tiered, going up 3 flights of stairs between theater entrances and the Michael Reynolds Museum, accessible only to those who have completed all 6 attractions. From the top, you can get another vantage of the foggy, bleak landscape surrounding the park. As will be explored in the attractions themselves, it's curious that there is nothing surrounding the park. No parking lot, no walkways. Perhaps this is only the inner part of a larger estate, with more stringent security measures in place around the actual perimeter. After all, with so many guests never coming back, you'd think that angry or distraught family members, friends, or the media would be swarming the gates looking to get answers and a peek inside. Furthermore, with such a low fence and only one employee attending the ticket booth, break-ins would seem feasible, though I suppose they would need an actual Illbleed ID to participate. We'll keep these points in mind as we delve into the attractions themselves, all of which reveal bits about how the park actually works. Thanks for listening, and we'll meet back here for the Home Run of Death in Episode 2. Later, Gators.